Welcome to another episode of the We Are All Dying podcast. Today I talked with Cole Imperi. She is a thrice, maybe going on 4 times, thanatologist with her own thanatology school and has done incredible work as it relates to death, grief, loss, and really has made this her life mission, and she's doing it. She's just the young age of 40, and the impact she's made on the way that we die and we grieve is remarkable. So if you haven't discovered Cole, this is your discovery. This is the moment where you now know that Cole is out there doing this work, and I hope you will follow along with her journey. You're going to love this episode. Anyone who's tuned into this show, it doesn't matter if you're here because you're curious in death work, or you're here because you want to have better conversations around death, loss, and grief, or because you've got a broken heart and you're moving through the process. This episode is going to touch on all of that. We talk about shadow, grief, and loss. We talk about the ways in which institutions or even clinical practices have made it difficult for us to navigate grief and death and loss. There's so much goodness in this, and I'm so excited for you to listen to our conversation. So let's get into it. So excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a delight. And today in particular, we are recording on my very first day back above water after moving. I have just spent the last 5 days moving. So,
Wow. Well, we're on that topic. Did you notice anything as you were moving that relates to death and loss and grief? Did that come up for you as you were moving things? I can imagine.
yes, it happened yesterday morning. Yesterday morning, I like got out, my husband had left and the house was to myself. And my iPhone has that thing where every hour it changes the photo. And it was a photo from Ruby, who was my dead beagle, her 16th birthday. And I just saw her picture and I wept. It was like 3 days after she died, and she died in 2020. And I have not cried like that in the last half decade since she died. And I'm sure it was just, it's the mixture of heightened everything with relocating and moving and stuff. But man, I cried. And then I was looking at pictures of her. And it was really interesting because something I've been sad about over the last few years since her death, I was very close to her, was I would get sad because I couldn't remember her as strongly as like I remembered her like a month after she died. And I was sad, like grieving that. But it was like weird. I had this window where I could so exactly recall her in her totality. So that was unexpected to be crying over my dead dog yesterday. So yeah,
Wow.
it happens. Grief bubbles up.
Right? Yeah, in the most unexpected ways. And I wondered that you were alone when that happened. Were you kind of
Hmm.
happy? I feel like you and I can talk about grief in ways that maybe other people can't. So,
Yep, totally.
this might seem strange to ask someone else, but did you appreciate that you were alone to kind of have that moment to pause and just let it go?
Yeah, I did because I am really sensitive to people that are in my environment. I feel like I'm always like, can I get you something to do? What do you need? How are you feeling? What's going on? And alone time is really necessary for me because I don't have to edit myself based on the other people around me. And I find that I do any of my sincerest emotional processing by myself. I don't do that deep stuff with others. And also, the first time I found out my bedroom is a great place to cry. Good news. New house, new bedroom, new place to cry. Nobody could hear me. No neighbor could hear me. It was great. So tested that out.
Right. I always thought that we should have a chance to be able to sleep in the house before we buy it because we want to
Uh-huh.
know, like, does anything haunted happen? But maybe we
Yeah.
should get a chance to cry in the
To
house to see
cry. To have an ugly cry. So yeah, yeah. So I already took it out for a test drive.
so on brand, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Amazing. Okay, well, I'd love to ask people if they can remember the first time that grief came into their life or even just an understanding of death. Usually it's sometime in childhood, but do you remember your first experience or knowledge of death and what that was like for you?
So the first like real loss or grief experience I remember was September 11th, 2001. But my first actual grief experience I don't remember, but my parents and my family do. There was this movie called The Nine Lives of Thomasina,
Hmm.
and it was about this cat. And I have no idea why this was a children's movie, why I was watching it. It was about this cat that would die, and because it had 9 lives, and it would come back. And I, as a kid, I think I was maybe 4 or 5. My mom recalled that for days on end, I was distraught. I was devastated. I was grieving over this cat. But I have no memory of that at all. But it affected my whole family from what my mom recalled about it. So I guess I'd always been sensitive or keyed into,
Yeah.
loss or death. So yeah, those are sort of the first one I remember, and then the first one I don't remember.
Have you seen the movie since?
No, and you know what? I don't want to see it. And I do have one of my earliest memories is like this flash of this movie of the one of the ways the cat died. And I'm like, how
Wow.
is this a
This
children's
sounds
movie? Like,
awful.
I'm like, I don't think this is 20 would be 2026 approved, you know?
Right. Yeah. Um,
Yeah. But otherwise, do you mean to tell you the September 11th
sure.
story?
Yeah. And how old were you when that happened?
I was 16. I was
Okay.
a junior in high school. And so September 11th, for anyone listening in the United States, okay, it's kind of known. Um, for me, I was home from school that day and I was rehearsing a eulogy that I had written for
Wow.
my grandfather. My grandfather died on September 7th from like heart failure, and his funeral was the morning of September 11th, 2001.
Wow.
And I have a big family. I've got like there's 6 aunts and uncles and like 20, 30, 40 plus cousins. And for some reason, this is another thing that I look back now, I'm 40 now, and I look back and I'm like, why? This was like my first family member death. Why
Yeah.
was I writing a eulogy for that? I was a kid. I had never like been to a funeral. I didn't know. And I remember the days leading up to September 11th, my grandfather's funeral. I was so stressed about this eulogy, and I didn't get to grieve because I was so I wanted to do a good job and I wanted to be a good granddaughter. And so I was rehearsing the eulogy while my mom was crying in the bathroom, curling her hair, and the news is on, and we see the
Whoa.
planes flying in, and then we were driving to the church for the funeral, the second plane hit.
Wow.
And then we did the funeral service, and then at the end, everybody was like, "What happened?" and finding about this
Yeah.
terrorist attack. And then we went to the cemetery and buried my grandfather, and that was one day. And that I'm sure had probably a larger, but it's probably directly impacted why my professional work as a thanatologist today. I am most interested in shadow losses,
Yeah.
the losses like losses in life, not of life. I'm really interested and care most about the parts and pieces of grief that are not often seen or recognized by society. I think I have the most intense softness for people who have layered loss experiences, like your first funeral on the day of a terrorist attack at the same time.
Yeah.
That's wild. And or people who lose 5 or 6 family members in the course of 12 months.
Yeah.
The layering and the complexity, that I'm sure the seed for that in my later years, my work was started on September 11th, was going through that.
Wow. That's so shaping, right? At that age, especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was the same age as you, and I remember me and a friend just left school. Like it was like on the
Yeah.
TVs at the school, and then we just decided to leave. Like we just like left and walked
Yeah,
away.
I remember, and all the kids were, my friends were at high school, and
Yeah.
one of the students was on one of the planes and died. And
Wow.
so like the kids watched one of the
Wow.
classmates die, and that was also wild to come back to school when
Yeah.
normally you would come back to school and everyone would be like, "Oh my God." At the time I was Nikki.
Yeah.
Nikki was out for a funeral, but instead it was like shit hit the fan
Right.
in
Yeah.
the United States.
Right.
So,
And your grief's in
yeah.
the shadow. Your grief is placed in the shadow because this bigger grief
Yeah,
overlaps.
and then there was a student that died in the terrorist attacks, and
Yeah.
it's fine, but I'm 16, so I
Yeah.
totally normal. It's totally normal for a 16-year-old to be
Yes.
like, why is no one caring about my dead
Absolutely.
grandpa? So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Wow. One of the reasons I reached out to you was because you put a name to what I had been trying to put words to, which was shadow loss.
Mhm.
So let's get into that. So tell me a little bit
Yeah.
more, like maybe unpack it a bit more for people who've never heard the term, and kind of how you found your way to shadow loss theory. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay, so I am a thanatologist. Thanatology is the study of death, dying, grief, loss, and bereavement. And I have three credentials from three programs in two different countries and two different languages.
Because why
And
not?
yeah, 'cause I was like, more, and I'm trying to find a
Collect.
fourth one. So, um, so shadow loss is the thanatological contribution that I've made to the field that I'm the most proud of. And it is a non-clinical term, which is very important to me. So let's start here. So number one, most of the language we have about death, dying, grief, and loss are clinical terms. They're diagnoses. They're terms that were built within and set against the backdrop of like a clinical environment where you go, like where you have like a PhD or a doctor who is trained to make an assessment, to do a diagnosis, and then to generate a treatment plan. And so all of these beautiful, important, and necessary words and terms, things like Dr. Kenneth Doka's disenfranchised grief or ambiguous loss, or all of these those are big $10 words. They're clinical, they're built in a clinical environment. And that's why they're weird when you're sitting around the kitchen table with Mima and you're like, my group is disenfranchised. And Mima's like, honey, what does that mean? And so we have a problem in English, in the English language, where we do not have a lot of basic non-clinical words to help us describe and own our own lived experience with death, dying, grief, and loss. So shadow loss is a word. A shadow loss is a loss in life, not of life. It's the death of something, not someone. And so common shadow losses are things like a divorce or a medical diagnosis. I was diagnosed as infertile like 4 weeks after I got married. And I grieved that, but there was no funeral, there was no dead body, there was no obituary, but like my whole future died because whatever I did in the realm of kids was not going to be straightforward. And I was like 22 years old when that happened. And so that was the death of this particular future that I had was that medical diagnosis. Um, Now, the thing about a shadow loss that's really important to me and important for me to see others have, which is the ability that you can claim it for yourself. Nobody can diagnose you with a shadow loss. Only you can say if it is. So, for example, if two different people go through a divorce, one person may be like, no, actually, we started getting along better and we're on the same page and we didn't really grieve because things are better. But somebody else could absolutely be grieving the death of the marriage, the death of the family, the death of holiday events, because sometimes when a marriage dissolves, one spouse, all of their holiday functions and stuff was attached to the spouse's family, and so they're grieving the shadow loss of losing those cultural rituals that came through the marriage. So that is what shadow loss is, and that is what I have contributed to the field, and it's been really wild to see how it's moved around the globe. We use the software at the School of American Thanatology. It's like social listening software. So it scrapes social conversations and it just listens to see what people are saying. And we've seen the word hop into, I think, more than 16 countries, and it's hopped into different languages because it's filling a void, a non-clinical basic word that we can use to describe our own lived experiences with death, dying, grief, and loss.
Amazing. Like, let's just take a moment because that is like I am so excited about this because I was trying to use like disenfranchised and all the stuff that
Hmm.
even as I was saying it, I was like, this isn't how I want to connect with people in these words. And then this word
Yeah.
comes along and it's just so easy. It's so easy to
Yeah.
understand.
And it
I
saves you
yeah,
time because you don't have to be
absolutely.
like, well, I just got married and 4 weeks later I found out I was infertile. And then like that. Instead you can be like, we got married. I found out I'm infertile. It's a shadow loss.
Yeah.
You know right away, okay, she's grieving. She
Yeah.
needs some support. And it stops one of the things, so the term came to develop out of the world, out of the ether for me because I needed it. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. I was assaulted in 2015, or I think in 2015, and I ended up developing post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of the things that causes that is when you are constantly asked to
Mm,
retell and relive whatever traumatic experience happened to you.
yeah.
And in the aftermath of the assault, I would get questioning all the time, even from my own parents, that was like, but did you bleed? Like, tell me the details. Like, but like, what was it like a real assault or like, was it like what? And so then you end up having to over justify and be like, no, this is what happened. This is how it went down. This is the thing. And every time that your brain tells this, it is reliving it.
Yeah.
And so I ended up developing PTSD, and it would have been totally avoidable had I had a term like shadow loss to say, my assault was a shadow loss.
Yeah.
All you need to know is I am grieving and I need to be supported in that way. And it saves you so much emotional labor, and it literally can protect your brain. It would have protected my brain for sure. And 10 years later, my symptoms have mostly resolved, although I do still have a few triggers that are still there and that I carry with me. So, yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if also just like some of us can have such a hard time knowing what to say when someone's dealing with the grief of someone who died.
Yep.
But I think we're a little bit better at maybe having the words for these shadow losses that you talk about because I don't know a person who hasn't had one, right? Like
Yes.
especially by the time you hit like late 20s, early 30s, 40s and beyond, you
Hmm.
may have had some big losses of people, but you've definitely lost maybe jobs or friendships or
Yeah.
abilities
Or
or this
dreams.
dream. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
okay, right now with stuff that's happening in the
Hmm.
United States,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who had like saved 25 years to
Yes.
retire to take their whole families out of the country on a trip.
Yeah.
They can't do that right now. I mean, there's all kinds of grief. And it's really wild when you think about the fact that we haven't had in a colloquial, in conversational word like shadow loss to describe all of this because they're everywhere. There are more shadow losses than there are death losses, and a death loss is when a human or there's a dead body.
Yeah.
But shadow losses are far more common. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like keep talking about it. I'll keep talking about it.
yeah, use
And
it.
yeah.
It makes me so delighted when I see oh, I want to tell you about the moment where I was like, oh shit, this is like it's real. It's like beyond me and it's left the creator of the word. I was on my cousin had like do you know what Discord is? It's like a little like
Yeah, I'm
chatty.
not
It's
on
like
there, but I
Slack
like
or
get it. My
okay.
son does some stuff. Yeah.
There's a Discord and there's a Discord server for like home decor and like that kind of thing. And there's different threads like for drapes discussions and kitchen discussions and all of this. And I was in this server and there was like some general thread and somebody in there had shared about some sort of loss. And somebody in the comments was like, my therapist told me about this term called shadow loss. That's what you're experiencing. And I'm like, what is happening? I'm in a Discord about home decor, and
Yeah,
there are people like, and a therapist told this person, and it was really wild, and it was also really beautiful. And
absolutely.
I felt like I had contributed something of value
Yeah.
to the world.
Yeah.
So,
That's amazing. Well, I mean, I heard in another conversation you had, like, and this I think was from like 2017. I listened to an interview that you did. Your
mhm.
mission is to change like the way in with which death and grief is dealt with in the United States. And like
Yep.
you're doing it. Like that's happening.
Yep.
It's made it to home decor.
Yeah, yeah, and that really is my mission is to improve or change the way we deal with death, dying, grief, and loss in my lifetime. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to do. So,
So are there like some other injustices or like things that have been like that momentum for you or like moments where you're like, yes, this is where this needs to be inserted?
um, it's interesting. I think also just because I just like moved and our move was stressful because the owner of the house that we were renting died. And
Hmm.
so it was interesting to live in a place where then the owner died and then all the kids who are inheriting the property, they want their money. And so they decided that they want to sell. And then my husband and I became this thing that's like they're preventing us from getting money and being able to sell the house. And then they were like, get out. Um, the reason I'm sharing that is because housing is absolutely something that a lot of people grieve. I mean,
Yeah.
how many times, I mean, think about the refugee experience.
Yeah.
Think about people here in the United States who are getting ripped out of their homes.
Yeah.
People who live in unsafe neighborhoods where they're
Mhm.
afraid to open windows. Just your home itself. So many of us have had traumatic moving experiences where your parents kick you out at 18 years of age. And what I've learned over the years is we have so many shadow losses and grief from the most ordinary of things, homes,
Mhm.
food. How many of us who came, are you my age? Are you like
Yeah.
40? How old are you? Okay.
41. Yeah.
So do you remember like high school years? It was like, unless you were like white and skinny, you were a failure, like food itself.
Yeah.
And so many of us in our millennial peer group right now, we are still trying to rectify the way that we treated ourselves with
Yeah.
nourishment, and unpacking that. And there's a shadow loss there. There's a shadow loss of our teenage years, the stuff being beaten into our heads and us internalizing it. And now we've grown up and we're trying to release it. So yeah, there's shadow losses with all of the most ordinary parts of life. And for me as a thanatologist, I actually did not get into the work because I wanted to help people, if that makes sense. Like, and I didn't know this until I was more than 10 years into my career. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of people who become doctors or nurses because their primary motivator is I want to work with one person and I want to fix them and I want to make them better and I want to see them happy and then I feel good from that. I don't have that type of motivation. So I never got into this work because of that dynamic. I got into it because I find grief to be endlessly fascinating. It
Mm.
is complex. I have so much curiosity about it. It's this big thing that affects and directs so many of our lives and our decisions. And a lot of us don't even really understand to what extent or depth. We all live with it. It's not something we teach in schools to our children. It's something our families live with and carry, but sometimes we don't talk about for generations.
Yeah.
Grief is like, that's fascinating to me. And so that has always been why I think, stuck with it because I view it as from that, I guess, more traditional scientific perspective, but like the sake of it. I do love when I hear that it helps people, and my own work has helped myself and my study of it, but that's not what has kept me in the field.
Yeah. I can relate. There was a moment for me, everything from like, the indigenous people who have been grieving their land while we're also on it,
Yes,
destroying
yes,
it, right? There's all
yep.
these layers of history of grief. And my undergrad was in peace and conflict studies and political science. And so like, and I'm like putting all these things, and then my master's was in economics. And I'm starting to see like, what would the world be like if there was not so many grieving people that were unaware of their grief,
Which
right? Like
causes so much conflict.
so
Conflict
much
is
conflict.
often directly results from unresolved grief or unwitnessed grief. So you know
Yes.
what the truth is? It's like also sometimes it's okay for your grief to never resolve. Like I think
Yeah.
it's well, a lot of people can live their
Yeah.
whole lives, but I think the problems happen when it's not seen or witnessed, when it's
Yeah.
disenfranchised. Just
Yeah.
seeing it and acknowledging the grief can help diffuse or prevent a lot of conflict.
Right? Like from like these macro situations to even, you know, similar, like thinking about like a family dynamic and having maybe a parent like acknowledge that something that happened to you, um, like seeing the grief that you had, even though you can't fix what might have happened,
Yeah.
it changes how your grief lives in you, even if it's still something that's hard for you. So yeah, I just think this is such an exciting time to be talking about grief, to be working on grief, because it feels
hmm
like a missing piece to part of our human challenges, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, for you, from your vantage point, what is most interesting to you about grief?
Yeah. So when I started this podcast, I was curious, will people talk to me about death? Like, I can't seem
Mhm.
to find people to talk to me about death, and I find it very motivating. When
Mhm.
I was younger, I was very suicidal, and when I kind of came through the other side of that and realized death was going to take me out anyways, I didn't have to worry about the method or the timing or any of these things. I had a new appreciation that I was alive and that I would die.
Mhm.
And so I've always wanted to talk about like this impression of like we only have so much time, right? Like it was a big motivator for me to live life in a different way and to think about like what's important before you die. But then when I started getting into these conversations, it really opened up my world to like social justice issues and realizing that all the things that I'm really passionate about in the living of our lives, they also exist in death, right? Death is not equal. It is not,
Mm-mm. No.
treated in such a way, even just the privilege to be able to have a podcast talking about death that's like make the most of your life while people are being murdered, right?
Yes,
While entire
totally.
communities are grieving.
Totally.
It's also my own sort of like unpacking of privilege in the space of death and grief and loss. Even, learning, not learning, but like recognizing I have a place to grieve. Some people don't. Their grief might be public. They might be someone that we drive
Yep.
by on the street and they're just weeping and someone, thinks something really awful and judgmental about them. Well, they don't have somewhere private to grieve and you do.
No. Hmm.
Yeah, so for me, it's been a big motivator to like try to bring this just into our conversations, make people more comfortable talking about death and grief and loss, because I do think that it's a relational thing. And whether we decide or we realize that our private moments are the most helpful for us, I do think it's a community project. And so,
Yes.
I want to invite people into the community project and see where they fit because I also find it, I've seen it be very valuable for people to be with the dying. I think that, there's dead, like someone's dead, but the dying, the active dying, like that's such a gift to be present to. And
Yes.
it's like the final act of all of our lives. It's like, it's so amazing. And I know that's so strange probably for some people to hear because it's the end of it can be so, hard and hurtful and, devastating. But so I'm
Mhm.
trying to like be in this space and bring people in so that other people can listen to conversations about death, right? Like, so someone's
Yes.
listening to this and they're like, oh, this is people having conversations about death. Maybe it's not so scary. Maybe it's even inspiring. Maybe it's, getting someone passionate about something they've always wanted to do and they don't think it's so weird now or obscure. So that's kind of my drive. So, like, finding people like yourself who are
Hmm.
making this is your life work and it's making a difference. And yeah, so I'm just so
Yeah.
appreciative.
Yeah. I find that if you ever, like anyone listening, if you have an interest in this, you should pursue it because there's nothing superficial about it. And I think that's a really necessary antidote or opposite to life today, like just social media, your cell phone, so much, even like the news. So many people get their news in 30-second bits and bobs from TikTok now,
Yeah,
right? Like it's just that's happened. And I think when you work with death, dying, grief, and loss in some way, whether you're volunteering or just thinking about it or reading about it, um, it it's very grounding. It's depth. It's a way to genuinely connect with others. There's nothing more powerful. When I do public speaking, one of the ways I usually open my talks is I ask people to raise their hands and I say, raise your hand if you have a dead sibling. People see each other. Raise your hand if you have a dead mom, if you have a dead dog, if you have a dead dad. And what I always see happens after the talks is the people who had the dead siblings, they find each other afterwards because you
yeah,
immediately can connect with somebody because you have these massive life-changing experiences that you can find other people that you can relate through, you know? My sister Christina died like 6 years ago in her early 40s. And whenever I see someone post that their sibling died, their sister died, I immediately am like, hey,
yeah.
I can talk to you about this. I know what it's like. And that means something to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
just like imagine like a crowded street of people just like walking and nobody has any idea like how much they really have in common.
Yep. Yeah. And I always say I really feel that 1 out of 3 people, this is my own number from my own work, 1 out of 3 people are grieving a death loss or a shadow loss. Like if you ask them, and most people will only say that they are if like there was a funeral 2 weeks ago. But what I tell people is like, so like for example, yesterday when I was bawling about my dead dog 5 years later, I'm grieving something right now. And most people, more than half of the world is grieving something at any time to varying depths and levels.
Yeah,
But grief can pop up for anybody. It can resurface from years ago. Things trigger it out. And I think the world would change massively overnight if everybody woke up in the morning and approached every other human being like they're probably grieving. You don't know for sure, but I'm going to treat them like they're grieving something. And I think it would transform the world immediately.
100%, 100%.
Mhm.
Okay. Thanabotany. That's
Yeah.
another one. There you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanatology and botany. That is so cool. This is something new that you've been working on.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, tell me about it.
So I had a botanical research fellowship in 2017. And my proposal for that fellowship was I wanted to research the intersection of plants and plants and thanatology, and not knowing where it would lead. And it ended up in the establishment of a subfield of botany called Thanabotany, which is the intersection of thanatology with ethnobotany, which is the plant-person relationship. It's an interdisciplinary field. And I've had students take my Thanabotany 101 course online through the School of American Thanatology in over 30 countries. And then we have a big database with information. And so, and what's most of note, this is me with that, like, but is it useful in real ordinary life? We've had people from more than 40 different professions reach out and request Thanabotanical information.
Wow.
So let me give you an example. Um, I was working as a death companion in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, and I'll shout her out, Summer. Summer hired me to work as her family's death companion because her dad had passed away. Um, there's a show on Netflix that interviewed me and Summer about this. If anyone's interested, the show is called The Future of, and the episode is called Life After Death. It's on Netflix. Anyway, Summer's dad wasn't like religious in particular. And so many people die and they're not particularly like religious. But he also had a big, huge network of people. He had ex-wives and wives and kids and stepkids and lots of different hobbies throughout his life and all different types of people there, not all unified by one thing, like, oh, we're all the same religion. No. So how do you create a unifying, meaningful thing for people that are from different countries, different politics, different ages? How do you do that? Plants. Plants are not offensive. Plants are relatable around the world. And so, how do you pick a plant that means something? So,
Mm.
I asked Summer, I was like, was your dad ever like proud of his ancestry or his heritage? And she said,
Mm.
yeah, he was really proud of his Welsh ancestry, Wales. So, I went into our database and I pulled up Wales to see what came up. And there's a tradition there that I believe is still practiced in some parts of Wales today, not all, where the female next of kin, so Summer would have been that, was responsible for keeping a grave covered in like rosemary for 2 weeks after death. And so Summer and her husband worked in the food industry in Cincinnati, and I asked them to harvest rosemary from the kitchen garden, and we brought it at the graveside on the day that we were having a graveside service for her father. And I explained that this traditional thing behind the rosemary. And every single person that came to bury Summer's dad walked up one by one, picked a sprig of rosemary out of this pretty brass bowl I had, and then they covered the grave with it. Um, and that ended up developing kind of an unexpected thing, long-term grief support. Because what'll happen is like a friend will be at a conference in Vegas for like concrete, and they'll text Summer a picture or something of like a cocktail with a rosemary sprig in it and be like, thinking of you and your dad. And so what that ends up facilitating is a way to check in on somebody and to still see their grief without being like, hey, I remembered that your dad died. That's different than saying, look at this rosemary that I'm seeing, I'm thinking of you.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of how Thanabotany has real life applications. We've had chefs contact us. We've had museums for additional information on some of the historical representation of plants that appear in different artworks. Funeral homes, people who are landscaping, memorial gardens, zoos, arboreta. We've had physicians. I mean, all kinds of people that have use for what plant can we use that is meaningfully connected in some way, shape, or form to this use case. So yeah, so that's Thanabotany. And now I I relocated to Los Angeles from Northern Kentucky like 4 years ago. And I was approaching like 20 years, it's sort of in thanatology. And I've seen a lot of stuff over the years, and it's very cumulative. You
Mm.
can only see so many dead bodies so many times without it like
Yeah. Can
affecting
you
you.
share a little bit? Because I know that you've done stuff in crematoria. I know that you've done
Yeah.
chaplain work in jails. Like you've done a lot of stuff. Do you want to kind of
Yes.
give us the menu?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, there's really no such thing as a job just walking around being a thanatologist. Okay. Like nobody is like hiring someone to know about death, dying, grief, and loss with full benefits, $100,000 a year, come to work 9 to 5, be
Yeah.
a thanatologist. That doesn't exist. So most people who are thanatologists, thanatology is like a backpack. So they might be a physician who works in a hospice and they are also like certified in thanatology. Or you have somebody who is a school counselor, but the school they're at has a lot of kids that are dealing with shootings
Yeah.
and drug addicted parents and stuff. So you have a lot of grief, and they become a certified thanatologist to better able reach their population. So for me, I've always worked in and around death, dying, grief, and loss in a lot of different ways. And the way I would describe my career is, if any of you know anyone, or maybe you have, like maybe you've been a nurse for 30 years. So that's like you have a building and you've been a nurse for 30 years, and that's like you've looked in this one window for 30 years and you know everything about this view to the inside of the building. You know exactly how the sun hits throughout the year, you know the rhythms, you know when it creaks, you know the pathway people take through. For me, I've spent 3 to 5 years looking in different windows into the same building, but I'm seeing into the inside from completely different angles and sides. I don't have the same level of knowledge that I would have if I was 30 years in one role, um, but I have a unique perspective because of the hopping that I've done. So, for 5 years, I traveled the United States, Canada, and Central America as part of teaching faculty for an international death care association where I would certify and train licensed funeral directors and embalmers to become certified crematory operators. As such, I was also doing consulting work in all of those places where funeral homes, cemeteries, crematories, hospices would hire me because I had seen so many of these facilities and buildings and how the business side of things, the money. I would get brought in as a consultant to fix problems. Sometimes it was staffing problems. Sometimes it was like our fix our website. Sometimes it was fix our retort. Retort is the thing that cremates you. And so I did all kinds of stuff for all of those businesses for a long time. I also taught at multiple mortuary colleges as an instructor. I became a clinically trained chaplain, and then I had a placement in one of America's 25 largest jails. And so I would work directly with people experiencing incarceration, and most of that was grief. Those conversations we had, it was grief. It
A
really
lot of
wasn't,
shadow loss, right? Like
oh
probably
my
a lot of
God.
shadow loss.
And
Yeah.
so much home shadow loss because a
Yeah.
lot of times they would be incarcerated and they knew that their landlord was throwing all of their possessions out on the road.
Yeah.
And they knew that they were going to come leave jail and have nothing and be 25 steps back,
Yeah.
sitting there and kind of administering to that. And by the way, clinically trained chaplains, this is not actually religious. It's spiritual care, which is not, it's a common misconception people have is you think clergy when you hear chaplain, and that's not actually what clinical chaplaincy is. So that's some of the stuff that I've done over the years. I've also been a hospice volunteer and I've led death cafes and all of those little like community-based things as well. So, and I have a book called A Guide to Grief that came out in 2024, and it's for 10 to 14-year-olds. And it's written from like a non-clinical perspective to 10 to 14-year-olds being like, this is probably what it's gonna be like. And also, there's a chapter in there for the kids that's like, what should you do if an adult around you is grieving? Like, what do you
Mm,
do? What do you
yeah.
say? Yeah. Um,
Great.
so that's it in a nutshell.
And
Yeah.
you have a school. Hello.
Yeah. So I own and operate the School of American Thanatology. We
Yeah.
have a ton of people that teach for us, and probably, I mean, thanatology is a big draw for us. We also certify people to become death companions. And then we also, as of last summer, are now the home of the Art of Dying Institute's Integrative Thanatology program. It is a 9-month program to become an integrative thanatologist, a death education counselor. I went through this program myself 10 years ago. So I'm a graduate of it.
Yeah.
And now the school is the administrative home of it, and we offer it, and it's all online right now. And we've got students in this current cohort has students in 5 countries, and I think 17 US states, and 2 Canadian provinces. So it's a neat way to kind of look at thanatology from a global perspective and with a diverse, group of people. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I'm up to. And I do work in a botanical garden
I want to
here
talk
in
about
Los Angeles.
hummingbirds.
This is
That's
yeah, the
what I saw.
hummingbird.
Yeah, so tell us about hummingbirds and how it all fits into the mix.
Yeah, so when I relocated to LA and I like was a few years out from turning 40, and I was also recognizing like I don't think mental health wise I can keep being this exposed to he- such heavy stuff. I'm not built for that. There are people that can do it 40 years, and I'm just not that gal. I'm just not. And so I had some grief there. It was, to sort of accept that about myself. And I'm like, okay, so I don't have any children. And so I have such privilege and resources to be able to, when like, what do you want your life to look like? And so it's taken like the whole 4 years. I kind of feel like it's just sort of falling into place. So I run the School of American Thanatology. So that's part of my, life, but it's all sort of online. Um, and because we have a global audience, so there's not a physical building. And I have been a lifelong gardener, and obviously plants have been something that have been deeply important to me. And I knew when I moved out to LA, because the weather is so great and there's so much gardening stuff, I was like, maybe that's the next step. And so, one of the first things I did when I moved out here was I enrolled and I became a master gardener. The master gardener program exists in Canada and in all 50 states in the US. It's a great way to learn a lot and meet people. So I did that. And then that sort of started building naturally and snowballing. And I became a California native plant landscaper earlier this year. And I'm really interested in now grief in the garden, essentially.
Cool.
So at a local botanical garden, I got a really amazing contract role. They have a hummingbird specific garden and gazebo, and I get paid to feed hummingbirds, and it's the most. I'm like, wow, I really do live in LA. Like, what do you do? I feed hummingbirds. I'm getting paid to do it. So, but hummingbirds are deeply connected to grief for a lot of people. And when I'm working in the garden, it's only like a couple days a week. I keep a box of tissues on my cart, my little cart that I wheel around. I'm pruning and mulching and weeding and planting stuff and feeding the birds and things. And they know me now, and they come up in my face and they check my earrings if there's red on them or something. Um, but I have people that specifically come to the hummingbird part because it's their deceased mom visiting them or their
Yeah.
sister or their loved one. And I am so grateful for my thanatological education and my chaplaincy training because I'm able to see these guests to the garden in a way that they're probably not expecting sometimes. Because I was like, are you visiting with somebody? Not the hummingbird? Who is it? Tell me about your mom. And that is so deeply meaningful to me. I cannot really put it into words without crying. It is so fulfilling and meaningful to me. And then I also love getting to take care of these little creatures they're nuts. Hummingbirds are crazy. And I didn't realize until I decided that I really wanted to try to develop some expertise in hummingbirds. That's just like a personal project. You have to have things in your life that are interest you. This is one thing that I've learned from working with death and dying. So many people on their deathbed have regrets where they're like regretting that they didn't go to culinary school or take cooking classes because they were a doctor and it didn't fit in and people would think they were weird for like whatever. And I'm like, I can be a thanatologist and know about hummingbirds, and that's what
Yeah.
I'm doing right now. And I'm trusting that. And what that really is I'm trusting myself. So yeah, so that's kind of what my life is right like now. It's half and half thanatology, like straight thanatology, and
Yeah.
the other half is horticulture.
Yeah.
And I am very happy.
Yeah.
Like it's
I
really
love
lovely to say that. I'm really happy.
that. That's fantastic. Usually at the end, I ask, if someone has advice for the living. And I think that that is really good advice is to,
It's that. What is the thing that you're
yeah,
not doing because you're like, oh, it's weird to be a thanatologist
Yeah.
who like feeds hummingbirds, you know, like because it is,
Yeah.
period, it is.
Yeah.
But like you have to get over that hump and you don't want to be 40 years old and withholding feeding hummingbirds from yourself because you're like, oh, it doesn't fit in. Don't
Right.
do that to yourself. People die and they have these. One of the patients I was working with in the hospice I was at for a while in Northern Kentucky. I remember it was like a week before she died. She had late stage cancer. Mother of four. She regretted not learning to quilt her
Oh,
whole life. She was in there, I'm making her coffee, and she's like, I wish I had really made time for this because she's like, I wish I had made a quilt for each of my daughters that I'm leaving behind. And
wow.
she never did it. And she's like, I could have done it. She's like, it was like such an old lady thing, and I didn't want to do it. And people made fun of you for like quilting, and I don't know what it was. And that really stuck with me. And I want to encourage anyone that's listening, like, what's a thing that whispers to you that it wants to do with you? And like, let it happen. What can take a small step to it? Maybe sometimes the first best small step is telling someone about it, is saying, Jenna, I really want to quilt. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to learn, but I feel like if I tell somebody else, it'll help things get moving. How would you do this? You know,
Absolutely.
tell people.
I love
Mhm.
that. Well, I'm going to ask you one more question then. So, for people who are listening and they may listen to this show because they feel this draw to death work, grief work, but they're like, I don't
Yeah.
know what I would actually do.
Mhm.
Do you have some self-reflective questions that could help people decide maybe what a first step is for them?
Yeah. So first this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like, are you interested in death, dying, grief, and loss from like that? This is just an interesting subject to me, which is more like me. Or are you into this because you're like, I love that dynamic of helping somebody and like affecting their life tangibly on an individual level, and you get rewarded from seeing the fruits of your labor. Because those are two different things.
Yeah.
And you need to know which one you are, because that can help you make better choices about where you like what your next steps are. Um, then for anyone who does want to work directly with the dying, I always recommend hospice volunteering. And the reason I recommend that is because you can be with actual dying people, or you cannot and still be a hospice volunteer. At the hospice I was at, we had volunteers who just staffed the front desk and answered the phones. We had volunteers who would come in once a week and pick up cards that they would then take home to write to the families. So there's ways to volunteer also with death, dying, grief, and loss. That doesn't mean that you're with people who are actively dying. And it's also possible that like you think you want to do that, but you're not sure. But like hospice is great because they will give you usually a 40-hour training. So you're going to become more educated and knowledgeable. And then there's going to be different options for volunteer roles that will meet you where you are. And hospice is a great way to start, at a distance with doing maybe some cards or something like that. And then you inch in, and maybe then you come in once a week and clean the staff break room, and you're walking by the rooms with dying people. And then maybe you get a little bit farther in, and then you're actually in the patient rooms with them and assisting. So hospice is usually what I recommend. And then another thing I recommend for anyone who's just interested is attend a local death cafe. Some of them are virtual, so you don't even have to leave home. And just put yourself in spaces with other people that are on the same path as you, because there's more than enough space for everybody. We need more people, but
Yeah.
it's really good to see the different types of people that are also interested and like why they're here and what they're interested in and what are they doing. That helps you say, well, I don't want to do that, or I do want to do that. So
Yeah.
network, I guess,
Amazing
as they
advice.
say.
Cool. I
Yeah.
cannot believe how fast that went. I could talk to you
Yeah.
forever. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much
Mhm.
for all of the work. You're like literally changing lives and deaths. And I'm so excited to continue to watch you. Like, you're still so young. You've done so much. And I can tell just by like the spirit of you, you're going to just keep evolving and changing as life goes on. So,
Yep.
thank you for that. We're all lucky to have you.
Thank you for having me. If people want, I have a Substack, and you can go to coleimperi.com and sign up for it there. And then I'm also on Instagram at Imperi, where I post hummingbird content. So if you want to see me with
Yeah.
hummingbirds. You can go there. And then we also have the School of American Thanatology, which is americanthanatology.com if anybody wants to come hang out in my corner of the internet. So,
Absolutely. I'll make sure to put that
Jenna,
all
this
the
was
show
like
notes.
lovely. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to have the chance to get to talk to your audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Cole. Okay. Thank you so much for listening to this conversation. I would love to know what spoke to you today. If there was some topics that you really want us to get into more, if you have questions, if there's something that can be helpful for you in navigating your own journey as someone working in the death space or grief space, or someone navigating death and grief in your own life, please reach out. Either I can help you or I can connect you with someone who can. This is a community project, as I always say, and I really want you to feel as though I am here for you, as are many people around this world.